Over spring break in 2016, our group of Catawba College honors students took a trip to visit and learn about Europe, specifically Germany and Poland, and how the roles these countries played in the time leading up to and during the Holocaust. The first stop we made was in Berlin, Germany. Berlin is the capital of Germany and is one of the 16 states in Germany. It has a population of 3.5 million people, which makes it the largest city in Germany and the second largest in the European Union. Germany was the center for major confrontation during the 1990s. There was World War I that occurred from 1914 until 1918. Then, between 1919 and 1923, there was the Great Inflation, which caused the value of the German mark to drop to 4.2 trillion marks per $1. There was also major political turmoil from 1919 until 1933. There were around 20 different governments in Germany, and they all lasted about 240 days. All of these events caused a deep division among the German people and helped the Nazi Party grow. The Nazi Party, also known as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, had become the largest political group in the country. The German president, Paul von Hindenburg, was told that working with the Nazi Party would be good for the country, and he was convinced that Hitler could be controlled. So, on January 30th, 1933, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, and he and his party were able to start their violent rule. In March of 1933, the Nazi Party created and started using the Dachau concentration camp. This was the first concentration camp established by the new government and would become the model for all Nazi concentration camps. During the first year of the camp's operation, there were around 4,800 prisoners, with the majority of those prisoners being political prisoners, though over time there were other groups that were brought to the camp. Some of those groups included Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals. The camp was divided into two sections, the camp area and the area for the crematorium. There were 32 barracks in the main camp area. Then there was the courtyard between the barracks and the central kitchen. In this courtyard there were poles used for the public execution of prisoners. Lastly, there was the crematorium area, where there were old and new crematorium, and there was also the gas chamber, though there is no evidence that this gas chamber was ever used to murder anyone. After Hitler had removed and imprisoned almost all of his political opponents in this camp and others, he began figuring out ways to solve his Jewish question. In September of 1935, at the Nazi Party's annual Nuremberg rally, the Nuremberg Laws were introduced. There were two laws that were enacted, and these laws became the foundation of Nazi anti-Jewish legislation. Under the new laws, only people of German blood could be citizens, while German Jews were just subjects of the state. These laws were used to define if a person was a Jew. There were racial specialists all around Germany that would examine eye and hair color and measure facial dimensions in order to determine whether people were racially superior or inferior. At first the plan was to only exclude Jews from German society, but the Nazis ended up enacting over 400 laws that defined and segregated Jews. The government then started closing Jewish businesses and expelled Jewish students from public schools, and then they started to move Jews into ghetto communities. One that we saw on the trip was the Krakow ghetto. Where the ghetto once was, there is now a memorial for those who were forced to live and die in the ghetto. There are 33 steel chairs in the square and 37 smaller chairs on the edge of the square at bus stops. The memorial has the chairs at the bus stops, and those chairs are used by the locals waiting there to show that anyone can be a victim. Hitler soon realized that just moving the Jews around was not going to work, because as he acquired more territory, his Jewish population would continue to grow. He decided that something else must be done with the Jewish population. So in July of 1941, Hermann Göring, who was the second in command, told Reinhold Heydrich that he had the authority to deal with the, quote, total solution of the Jewish question in the German sphere of influence. Hitler wanted the Jewish question to be dealt with by any means possible. So Heydrich orders his deputy Adolf Eichmann to plan a conference. They would invite several government representatives, including state secretaries from the Foreign Office, the Justice, Interior, and State Ministries, and representatives from the SS. At the conference, they were to compose the, quote, comprehensive solution of the Jewish question. It was scheduled for December 9th, 1941, but was postponed because of the United States entering the war. It was rescheduled for January 20th, 1942, at a villa in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee. The discussion by the 15 men in attendance at the conference centered around what to do with the more than 11 million Jews that Germany now had power over. The main purpose of the conference was to make sure that all the leaders would cooperate with the implementation of the final solution to the Jewish question, which was that the vast majority of Jews in German-controlled areas would be deported to Poland to be executed, or as they put it, evacuated. The other goal of the meeting was to determine who was a Jew and therefore how large the exterminations would be. Some wanted to follow the law and say that you had to have a certain amount of Jewish blood to count as a Jew, but others, like Hadja, wanted to evacuate anyone who was any part Jewish. The conference ends up lasting only about 90 minutes and mainly confirms that the SS would be in control of the final solutions and the Jews once they had been deported to the concentration camps. The final solution called for the creation of concentration camps, which would be used for the mass murder of nearly 2/3 of the European Jewish population. Following the conference, the Jewish population was gradually deported from most of the areas under German control, as well as from countries allied with Germany. The Nazis used wooden freight train cars to transport them to the death camps. They would pack each car with as many as 100 victims, and each train could hold 5,000 people, which could slow the trains down to just 30 miles per hour. The journeys could take days, and many people would die from hunger, thirst, extreme temperatures, or the awful sanitation. The conditions of the cars were awful, but were nothing compared to the concentration camps. One of the largest concentration and death camps that the Nazis built was Auschwitz I and Auschwitz II, or also known as Birkenau. From 1942 until the Allied forces liberated the camps, trains of Jews and other groups that the Nazis felt were inferior or harmful to the society were brought to Birkenau. The main way the Nazis would kill their victims was through the gas chamber. To do this, they would convince their victims that they were only undressing for a shower, and then guide them into the gas chamber, seal the door behind them, and pour the pesticide Zyklon B in. There were at least 1.1 million prisoners killed at Auschwitz, with around 90% of them being Jewish. Then we were able to go inside the original camp, Auschwitz I. This camp, like many other Nazi camps, has the sign that says, "Work brings freedom," which was another lie they told to the prisoners, because the majority of those who went to Auschwitz did not make it out alive. At the camp's peak, it nearly had 16,000 prisoners, and was the location of part of the SS administration and the main offices of the Political and Prisoner Labor Department. Here you can see a full map of all the communities that prisoners came from, and then there is a memorial with an urn of some of the ashes found here at the camp. In the following photographs, you will see personal items that the Nazis forced the prisoners to leave behind when they arrived at Auschwitz. These include things like reading glasses, prosthetic legs, arms, and other handicapped devices, pots, pans, and mugs, all kinds of shoes, suitcases which contain their clothes, and lastly, which is not pictured, their hair. The Nazis cut off over 2 tons of hair to be used for mattresses and other items for their soldiers back home. The prisoners' life in the camp was a very hard and awful life. They would be woken up very early for roll call that often lasted for hours every day. After roll call, the commando or the workers would walk to their jobs wearing their thin striped clothes and wooden shoes with no socks. While they were leaving the camp, a prisoners' orchestra would be forced to play cheerful music. The workdays normally lasted 12 hours and they were not allowed any rest time. Then, when they came back, there was another roll call and punishments were given out to those who they felt needed them, and the prisoners were allowed to go back to their barracks. There was one building that none of the prisoners ever wanted to go near, and that was block number 11. This was the prison within the prison. In the courtyard between blocks 10 and 11, there is what was known as the killing wall. Here those who the Nazis said needed to be executed were taken and put in front of the wall and shot in the back of the head. Then, in the basement of block 11, there were the prison cells. Here Zyklon B was tested for the first time. There were also starvation cells and standing cells that would be used to force 4 people to stand in one place together for hours. Auschwitz I also had a gas chamber and crematorium that was used until Birkenau was created. Some felt that being allowed to work in the camp meant another day of life, but to most of us today, that would not be a life worth living. After many years of war, Nazi Germany finally started to collapse. During the winter of 1942 and 1943, Allied forces coming from North Africa started gaining territory from the Germans, and the Soviets started pushing on the Eastern Front. Over the next 2 years, the Allied and Soviet forces gradually destroyed the German army, though the fight did not appear to end for the prisoners, because the Nazis started evacuating many of the death camps in late 1944, sending the prisoners on death marches. These marches resulted in almost 400,000 more deaths of Nazi prisoners and continued until May 7, 1945, when the German armed forces surrendered to the Allies and many of the concentration camps were liberated. It was very moving for myself and many of my classmates to visit these historic areas and learn about what happened firsthand. It is still extremely hard to understand how a man could lead a nation to hate another group of human beings without feeling much of any remorse. Those who lost their lives will continue to be remembered in the hope that we will never let such an atrocity happen again.